Hi, I'm Glenn Morgan. Thank you for watching. I'm with We the Govern, and this is the first of what we hope to be a series of videos focused on policy and political issues at the local and the state level, focused primarily in Washington State. Today I'd like to talk about a story out of Thurston County, which is where the state capitol is located, and mainly I want to focus on a $300 million proposed new courthouse project. This is going to be a big tax increase for the people who live in Thurston County. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're not alone. A recent survey in Thurston County showed that over 63% of the voters here have no idea that this proposal is even being considered. And yet, recently, at an April 30th Thurston County Commissioner meeting held down at the Rochester Middle School, the commissioners voted by a 2-to-1 vote to put on the ballot next April a major tax increase. This is going to be a property tax increase of almost 40% over what you're currently paying today. And theoretically, this money is going to be used to build a new courthouse for Thurston County in downtown Olympia. And here's why I think this is an important issue. Not just because the voters of Thurston County are facing a $300 million tax increase, but the process that brought us to this point appears to be one that was driven by staff and bureaucrats, not by the elected officials. And the challenge that we have is we elect elected officials to make these decisions. And yet when the decisions are basically created by the bureaucrats for the bureaucrats' own benefit, and the elected officials appear to be along just for the ride, then I think we have a process that's broken down. Now, there's other special interests that also have their hands on the pie here and are trying to push this in their own direction. And let's talk about that some more. Now, in order for them to come up with this pretty grandiose scheme, I mean, a $300 million project is a big deal. To come up with that, the Thurston County Commissioners last year in 2018 voted and approved 2 different measures that gave over $500,000 to a local architecture company to run through this proposal as part of the plan for this new courthouse. They kind of characterize these as plans, but what they really are is they already know they want to do this. They're just trying to put all the bells and whistles on it and spend your taxpayer dollars so that this isn't a plan anymore, this is actually the proposal, and to make it feel like it's just a done deal. And I think this is a flawed process, and there's a lot of problems with that. Let's talk about this tax increase. The tax increase itself is substantial. A 40% tax increase in Thurston County for your property for this building is a big deal. But what they're doing is they're pushing this through in what's called a general obligation bond. Now, what a general obligation bond is that it obligates future generations, and because they actually changed state law recently, this is going to be for 25 years, these bonds. So voters, kids that aren't even born yet are going to be paying for this. They've decided that they're going to pass this massive tax increase on future generations to pay for this. And the problem with general obligation bonds is that's not a normal way to fund capital projects like this when you're building buildings. Normally, what governments do, your school districts and other places, they pass what's called a revenue-backed bond that is primarily, that money is used to build capital projects. The downside to revenue-backed bonds is that voters must approve them by a margin of 60% or more. And the staff admitted, the Thurston County manager, Romero Chavez, said, we don't want to do revenue-backed bonds, even though that's the normal way of doing building buildings and financing buildings, because the voters of Thurston County would never support this at a 60% level. So instead, they're gaming the system with general obligation bonds because they know that voters only have to approve those at a 50% level. The second problem that we have related to this proposal is instead of running this tax increase in November, they decided to postpone the tax increase until April, when they estimate a much smaller percentage of the voters would actually participate. And again, that's for the same reason. They believe, they being Thurston County staff has admitted, and the supporters of this courthouse have admitted, that if a large number of voters in Thurston County actually had an opportunity to vote on this proposal, they would vote it down. And so they want to put it in a very obscure special election time in April, when they believe that less than 30% of the voters in Thurston County would actually participate. Now, gaming the system to get such a massive tax increase for a courthouse that we supposedly need so desperately is a big enough problem in itself. However, Thurston County's history when it comes to building structures like this is not very good. So let's look at this history and how Thurston County's actually dealt with building projects like this in the recent past. To say that Thurston County has a history of incompetence and failure is an understatement. In many ways, Thurston County has become the object of ridicule statewide for a series of construction failures in the past. And let's talk about just two of those. Number one, Thurston County a number of years ago was going to build a jail. And it was a jail that we needed, except that they had a grandiose scheme that they brought before the taxpayers, and of course that was voted down. But the Thurston County planning staff and the commissioners at the time decided that rather than accept the will of the voters, that they would push through and build this jail anyway. So again, using revenue or general obligation bonds, they decided that at a cost of $61 million to local taxpayers, that they would build this jail. Only they never bothered to budget to actually run the jail. So when the jail was finished, they actually had a jail that sat there empty for 5 years. And that made statewide news for years and made the Thurston County Commissioners deserved objects of ridicule. During that whole time that this jail sat empty, the taxpayers of Thurston County had to pay $250,000 a year just to do maintenance on the building, just to keep it sitting there empty. Now, they didn't start using that jail until the new independent commissioners were elected, and they finally found a way to fix the budget and actually start using the jail. But that's not the only problem that the Thurston County Commission has demonstrated failure when it comes to construction lately. Another failure is called the 3400 building. Now, this was a building that was purchased in Thurston County in 1998. It was an old fish factory fish cannery building. And what they wanted to do is, in theory, they purchased this for $3.1 million, and they were going to buy this and convert this into a jail. Only nobody bothered to check that the building couldn't be converted into a jail. So then, after they accidentally bought this building and they couldn't use it for what they thought they were going to buy it for or use it for, they decided to dump a lot more money into it. And over 18 years, they dumped $8 million into this building that they never used. It sat empty. It was occasionally used for storage, and they finally sold it at a loss just a few years ago. And I supported them selling it because it just become a money pit. But only in Thurston County can you take a building that was valued at $3.1 million when they purchased it and dump $8 million in it and sell it for less, only in Thurston County. This is really, unfortunately, a pattern of behavior, and it is highly unlikely that any new proposed courthouse would have any different outcome. And the voters of Thurston County, the taxpayers of Thurston County, should be very concerned when we hear this grandiose scheme of, once again, another building project that's going to be pushed by the Thurston County commissioners and staff. Now let's talk about this general obligation tax proposal anyway. Here's one of the problems with it. The Thurston County staff and kind of the special interests that are pushing this, and we're going to talk about the special interests shortly, are saying that it's about a courthouse, except that when you read the actual proposal, there's no legal obligation that Thurston County builds anything with this money. All you're getting is a guaranteed tax increase and no guaranteed building. And the funny thing is, they were confronted with this at the public hearing just a few weeks ago about the fact, John Pettit, a local citizen, confronted them on the fact that there's no guarantee that any building actually be built with this taxpayer dollars. And staff originally tried to say that wasn't true until they actually read the text of the language and they realized we were actually correct. They are not obligated to build anything. All this is a guaranteed tax increase. Now, here's the problem with general obligation bonds. The other problem with them is that they come out of the general fund, which means they come from the same pool of money that you would be paying for the police services and other basic services in Thurston County. And so when you're pulling from that funding and you run into financial trouble in the future, like, for example, that the building actually costs a heck of a lot more than anybody originally planned, those extra tax dollars have to be pulled from the fund, and what they have to do is they have to reduce existing services to the community, which means they're going to have to, since the majority of the money goes into the justice and the law enforcement budget, they're going to be pulling money, taking deputies off the road, laying them off in order to fund the inevitable boondoggle that this courthouse would become. So let's talk about some of the purported reasons that are being used to justify building the courthouse in the first place. And fundamentally, there are basically two of them. One of them is that there's not enough parking at the existing courthouse. And that's absolutely a very good and legitimate concern to have. Anybody that's ever gone to the courthouse and tried to find a parking spot, especially when they're busy, knows that sometimes you have to park a long ways away. And so if you've ever sat in a courtroom, you oftentimes will see people come running in at the last minute because they didn't realize how far away they were going to have to park and how long it would take for them to get to their court hearing. So I think that's a legitimate concern. But let's talk about why that is a concern in the first place and whether a $300 million new courthouse is really the best way to solve it. Number one, it's a concern because when they did the original courthouse design, they actually had put in 400 plans for 400 parking spots. But after the courthouse was built, the county, in its infinite wisdom, decided to block a lot of those parking spaces away from the public. And so there originally was going to be a lot more parking than you see here now. And basically Thurston County has decided to block those spaces away from the general public. And that can be solved for a lot less money than the $300 million proposal that is being considered right now. The other issue that's been brought up has been an issue of safety. And mostly this has to do with the transfer of prisoners. When this courthouse that we have today was built, it also had a jail in it. And they oftentimes had to transfer those prisoners from the jail up to their hearings, and they had to go down one hallway that was sometimes shared by judges. So the concern was that there was a potential conflict, safety conflict with these prisoners being transferred. However, remember we just discussed the Thurston County's history with building jails, and they had this empty jail for many years. Well, that jail's not empty anymore, and the prisoners that were in the current courthouse that used to be in that jail have all been moved out, and now they're over at the new jail. So the old prison, the old jail cells are actually empty. And the safety concern has been greatly mitigated. There's still a few issues that could be addressed, but again, solving those is a lot less than $300 million. They can solve it with some other different construction projects that would solve some of those problems in a much more efficient way. The other issue that's oftentimes used as an excuse is space, but they haven't brought that up so much because since they've emptied the jail in the existing courthouse, there's a lot more space there than there used to be. All those old jail cells are empty. And so my thought was we have plenty of room to expand within the current courthouse, and we could move the planning department and the building department and other bureaucracies down to those old jail cells. I think that'd be the perfect place for them to exist and to run their offices, and it just seems to fit. Now, let's talk about the other issue that people have brought up, which is the maintenance of the existing courthouse facility. And I think this is really important. And unfortunately, this is a game that we have seen. School districts have played this before, which is where the taxpayers fund an amazing facility that gets built. And for a number of years, it looks great. But at some point in time, the bureaucrats that work there, they decide they want a new one. And the first thing they do is years in advance, they stop doing normal maintenance on the facility. They start to let it go, start to fall apart. They stop repairing the roof, they stop painting it, they start letting things fall apart in that building. And that is exactly what the staff has done at Thurston County. And they haven't even been subtle about it. You could see at the hearing, the state treasurer, or the county treasurer, sorry, Jeff Cadman, got up and he bragged about the fact that the roof was leaking and he had a 5-gallon bucket catching the water and that it would fall over into his office. And that bragging about their failure to maintain the building as a justification to build a new one is really a problem. I mean, what guarantees do we have that they would maintain the new building any better than they've maintained the current building? And this is one of those other issues where staff-driven processes, this entire program seems to be driven by staff. They get to create the problem, and then by creating that problem, they get to find the solution that they've wanted from the beginning, which is a much bigger, fancier building and a nicer working environment or some fancy thing that they want. And so by doing that, they get to create the problem that justifies, that they then use as the excuse to justify moving there next time. Now let's talk about some of the special interests that are pushing this new jail. It's not just staff that wants to have a new, fancier facility. It's also the city of Olympia, because the city of Olympia wants Thurston County to spend all this money and to build this whole new courthouse facility downtown on it's called the Plum Street location. And one of the benefits to the city of Olympia is that according to an agreement that's been signed between the city of Olympia and Thurston County, that the city of Olympia gets to piggyback on Thurston County's investment and also get involved in the project itself to make sure it gets bigger and more expansive for some of their desires and needs. Now the problem is that probably the only place worse than Thurston County when it comes to building any facilities at all is the city of Olympia. The city of Olympia, which also spent an enormous amount of money and went way over budget on their current city hall and is in financial distress the majority of the time, with plenty of homeless camps downtown and all other kinds of drama as they're chasing businesses out, is basically attempting to salvage some of their financial troubles and outsource those problems to the taxpayers of Thurston County so that the taxpayers of Thurston County can subsidize some of their failures. This is not a good deal for most of the people who live in Thurston County, although it's probably a good deal to the politicians in the city of Olympia. Another special interest that's involved are the judges themselves. The judges in Thurston County, when you really get down to what their concerns are, most of them are focused on the fact that they want to have private bathrooms and they want to be able to walk to Starbucks. Unfortunately, it's as simple and benign as that, and it's kind of embarrassing, but that seems to be where their main focus is. The safety concerns that they had raised about potentially running into a prisoner in the hallway have been largely resolved, and so what it really comes down to now is this desire for private bathrooms and to be able to walk to Starbucks. It's which they can't do very easily at the current facility, so that's what they want to have. They want to have a new location in a downtown urban core. The other problem that you have is that the main primary vendor that you've used to do the research on this draft project for the new courthouse is the very architecture company who's going to be building that courthouse. And based on the contracts that they have, that architecture company gets a percentage of the total cost of the project, about 8%. So they're going to get $24 million to build a $300 million facility, or, as is likely, when it goes way over budget and the project gets out of control, they'll make even more money. And so this architecture company has every incentive to inflate the project and make it as complicated and troubling as possible. When you go back in the original process, there were less expensive, more effective ways that they could have addressed some of these concerns, like by remodeling the current facility, or by looking at a facility that wasn't in a downtown location, but they chose not to go either one of those directions, and they have an incentive not to because they make a lot more money as an organization if they go to the most expensive place they can find, which is downtown Olympia. So in summary, this doesn't seem like a good deal for the voters and the residents of Thurston County. In fact, most people who live there, clearly based on polling, don't even know that it's happening. But a bigger concern is the process and the decision-making events that occurred behind the scenes to get us to this point in the first place, and that is something that we really do need to address. Now, in this recent April 30th hearing, where the commissioners voted on whether or not to put this on the ballot, Commissioner Gary Edwards made an eloquent and very principled plea not to do so, that the courthouse was too expensive and that a lot of the planning hadn't been done correctly for it, and that it just didn't seem like a good option for the voters of Thurston County. And that's great. He stood up for the taxpayers of Thurston County. Unfortunately, we also had Commissioner Ty Menser, who was recently elected. Now, everybody knows that he ran on a campaign as Ty's the guy, and he is the guy. He's the high tax guy in Thurston County, and we know that he'll always try to push these high tax proposals. What's unfortunate is that the other commissioner, Independent Commissioner John Hutchings, who's a good guy, but unfortunately he's going along with Ty. And so the two of them decided to vote to put that on the ballot. Now, a little note of caution from history in Thurston County. In 1975, the commissioners proposed a similar effort that also had very little taxpayer or voter support in Thurston County to build the existing courthouse with all the same promises that people are making for the courthouse being proposed today. And the commissioners voted to put that courthouse and spend that money to build the one that we have today with all the same promises: sustainability, more efficiency, the ability to expand, better parking. All these are the same promises being made today. Every commissioner that voted against the goals and the will of the taxpayers at the time got voted out of office in the 70s. It's likely that the commissioners who are pushing for this project today are going to see the same fate. History tends to repeat itself. We want our elected officials to be in charge, not to let staff or special interests run the show. And when our commissioners are being run by staff and special interests, unfortunately, these are the types of decisions that are being made. There's several things you can do. Number one, I think you need to make a point. If you care about this, you should reach out to your elected officials, Thurston County Commissioners, and let them know what you think about this proposal. Secondly, get together with some of your neighbors. Let other people know what's happening. Again, the surveys show that the majority of people who live in Thurston County have no idea that this is even being considered. And third, you always have the ability to vote, and who you vote for does matter, and what you vote for does matter. You get to make your own decision in April whether you want this massive tax increase or not. But you also get to vote in November of 2020 which county commissioners you want to have in there. And you get to vote for anybody else that's involved in a lot of these decisions. Unfortunately, we can't vote for staff. But one of the things we can do is we can tell our elected officials to take charge, to get involved, and to make sure that staff isn't running the show. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, please go to wethegovern.com. You can see articles there about what we discussed today and other subjects. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share these with others if you like what you read. Until then, I look forward to seeing you next time.